Oh, the shark, babe, has such teeth, yeah, and it shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife has old Maggie, babe, and it keeps it out of sight. You know when that shark bites with his teeth, babe, scarlet billows start to spread. Fancy gloves, though, wears old Maggie, babe, so there's never a trace of red. Now on the sidewalk, ooh, Sunday morning,
Sorry about that. Just had to go over my notes a little bit. I hope you like this song because, like I said, it changed my life. I'll tell you someday later how. But I'm a big believer in like ritual, and so I'd like to start every show here with some version of that song. I think I mentioned before, it's been recorded over 100 times by different artists. So at least you won't get bored hearing the same guy sing it, okay? Especially me, as I've been doing recently. Anyway, I'd like to start a bit Socratic. Matter of fact, I was looking for my turban because I thought Socrates might wear a turban, but I don't even know if he wore one, so I put my usual one on. But I wanted to ask you a question to get this started before you even have any idea what I'm going to talk about. That question is this. If somebody was to say to you, like, oh man, that guy's got a big ego, or he's egotistical, or something of that nature, what would you start to think if they said that? Probably it would be negative, right? Well, let me tell you, it's one of the biggest jokes to me in the world. Every time I hear somebody say, "Oh, guys, he got an ego," he's a nice guy, but boy, has he got a bit of an ego, because let me tell you something. By definition, clinically, one would go totally and completely insane and probably die if they didn't have an ego, according to Sigmund Freud and everybody who's believed in even an ounce of psychoanalytic thinking. So with that little teaser in mind, I'm going to ask you another question. What do you think when you hear on the media someone referred to as narcissistic, which it seems like every person on the media somehow gets that word worked into their whatever their spiel is about them. So what do you think that word is? It's narcissism. Okay? Everybody's narcissistic. I remember that old song by, I can't remember his name, Joe Jackson. That song, everything gives you cancer. I was thinking it should be more like everyone has narcissism. It's got even a better beat, Everyone has narcissism, everyone. I mean, seriously, anytime you want to be nasty to somebody, you call them narcissistic instead of bitch. At least it's omnisexual, But anyway, the reason I'm, on this little rant, and I think it is a little bit of a rant, but I'm going to try to not be, is that I am deeming the word narcissism as the second generation of N-words. And we all know what the only first generation is, right? So I'm referring to narcissism as the N-word. And I want to encourage people to stop using it in a lay fashion, okay? And I'm going to try to prove that to you tonight because it really bugs me. Especially during the election. It seems like they should put in DSM-5, one of the 8 characteristics of a narcissist is to have orange hair. Yeah, I mean, everybody was throwing that word around. Everybody was narcissistic. I mean, then when the Hollywood thing hit, everybody was a narcissist. Well, is he a sociopath or is he a narcissist? What the fuck is like modern culture diagnosing on the media what somebody is? Why is that? I mean, isn't that a little weird when you think about it? There is so much psychology that is interjected into the culture that literally, TV shows are based on, certain psychological principles. Everybody talks in psychological rap. Isn't it interesting, the Church of Scientology, which I do consider a psychological orientation, okay? Sorry, guys, but I do. Why is that all of a sudden the focus of everything? Isn't that a funny metaphor? Well, isn't it interesting that we get focused on, okay, it's a psychological, it's a problem, okay? I'm not saying it's not, but why is it that we get so excited about it? I think it's because it has a psychological orientation that everybody kind of has inside their personality, which has been, eroded upon by the culture. We're an over-psychologized culture. And here's some examples, okay? Like, for instance, look at all the self-help groups. Well, first of all, I just watched an interesting thing that said that Scientology, it was really the beginning of the self-help movement, and I really kind of believe that. I really do. So you could date it back to like the early 50s, okay? And I'm talking about the culture of the 50s. And, like now you see things like AST, landmark seminars, like I said, Scientology, the Men's Warrior Weekend, even Nexium, had a self-help, the one that was that crazy sex cult with the Hollywood leader. Even that one, had a psychological foundation to talk people into doing screwy things. Here's another great one, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. Now there's a guy who took spirituality and turned it into Western psychology. I mean, that was what he was known for. That's why when you see some of his things, and he would, I'll get to that point. I'm sorry. When you look at the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, or if any of you has seen that movie, Wild Wild West, which talks about how he tried to take over Oregon, you'll see clips of them doing their various practices, and it looks very bizarre. And it is bizarre, because what he did was he kind of bastardized American psychological techniques. It isn't even psychology, it's just techniques, like do this, do that, do this, do that. And he was known for that. That's why he attracted a lot of people, besides the fact that he gave homeless people a place to live. We won't forget about that. But look at all the other ones. LifeSpring. I was a Lifestream instructor at one time. Lifestream, there were two of them, Spring and Stream. Same bullshit. Get your life together in, a week, 2 weekends, or, something like that. Actualizations, that's Stuart Emery's group. He was one of the first trainers that Werner Erhard trained, and then he split off and did this thing called actualization. Well, I could go on and on and on, but there's an example. Oh, I got to mention one other thing. I think the funniest thing is all the aforementioned groups that I just said, okay, that are an example of why I think I have evidence to say that we're a psychological culture, okay, is the fact that all of those, not all, but most of those groups, like for instance, Landmark, they're the same. Nexium would be another one. LifeSpring and Lifestream would be another one. I'm trying to think of a few more. But a lot, not Silva Mind Control, but there were a number of these get your life together in a day or whatever workshops. And the interesting part about it was those guys were all sales trainers for one of the first pyramid sales corporations that got sued, called Holiday Magic Cosmetics. I'm old enough to kind of remember it. But I later learned more about it when I got involved with a group called Lifestream, where he used to work for Holiday Magic. He was one of their sales trainers, the guy who trained me, the late Jim Quinn. And, so I guess I'm just trying to say that, just to show you how permeated we are with psychology, is that all these groups, they were actually sort of like how they arose out of a sales training program from the Holiday Magic Cosmetic Company. And the ironic thing about it is the head of the company, William Penpatrick, was giving a special experience of some kind to one of his head executives who was afraid to fly. And so he took him up on a plane, started doing loop-de-loops, and they crashed into a mountain and both died, as did Holiday Magic. And those guys didn't have a job anymore. So they all started doing AST and actualizations, all that bullshit. But there's another example. It just shows you that look at how it came out. I guess my point is that none of these people that I've mentioned are fucking psychologists, fucking social workers, fucking counselors, fucking psychiatrists. None of them are. Not one. And yet, the main flow, that's transmitting this kind of vibrations in the culture that's so psychologically oriented, it came out of a pyramid scam, sales force. So what I'm trying to say is that our culture has taken on sort of a lay psychology, character. But see, with what I just said now, it's really a lay psychology thing, because none of the people that even created the stuff that is shown in the culture were anything related to the field of narcissism. Okay, let's get back to that. So we throw this word narcissism around, thinking that it's just totally normal in this culture to think about things psychologically, and all you got to do is Google up DSM-5, which is the worst diagnostic manual I've ever seen in my life. Okay, I mean, they've just gotten continually worse. They don't diagnose anybody. They help insurance companies, really. And I mean, I got to take a break, guys. Losing my train of thought. Boy, am I glad that we took that break there. I was just starting to rant. You can see I'm kind of charged up about it, but this is getting kind of long, and I'd really like to try to do it in one session. Anyway, let me get back to what we were saying. I think the biggest example where you could see this dynamic I'm talking about in the American culture being so psychologically oriented would be like every time, since Scientology is such a focus of the media these days, whenever they start to explain about Dianetics, which is this kind of central principle, the counseling part of it, okay, they always say that, kind of flippantly, Dianetics is just basically a ripoff of Freud. Well, there's example number one, that where people are throwing around shit, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. The only thing that Scientology or Dianetics and psychoanalysis share in common is a respect for the notion that history plays a part in your current functioning. That's it. Otherwise, they're like apples and oranges, avocados and eggplants. Me and Meatball. Oh no, she's more like me anyway. But I mean, seriously, psychoanalysis is so far unlike Scientology. It just has a respect for history, but yet everybody will compare them like they're apples and oranges. So there's just another example. So we have this culture now that's like walking around talking all these words, using all this jargon so flippantly. And it fucking drives me crazy. And I'm only whispering because I don't want to scare my neighbors. Okay, it drives me nuts. I hate it. Narcissistic this, narcissistic that. Oh, we had narcissistic sex. I'm tired of it. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Because if you understood the dynamics of narcissism, you'd have a totally different perspective. I mean, and I can't really teach you narcissism so you could use the word properly, but I can give you some ideas about what it is. First of all, when you think of the word narcissism, the public opinion would seem to be like a narcissistic person is someone who's like self-centered and arrogant, entitled, manipulative. Oh yeah, that's another big one. Everybody who's manipulative is narcissistic. That's so full of shit. I can't believe it. Okay. And also, here's the big one. Okay. Oh, this is the greatest. When you say the word narcissism, the first thing that somebody associates with that word is being in love with yourself. Let me tell you something, okay? If you knew about narcissism, these people hate themselves more than most people have ever hated themselves. They hate themselves. And I want to get that through to you. At least have a little bit of empathy before you throw the word around. You think they're so in love with themselves. No, they look like they're in love with themselves. But I'm going to take another break and I'll explain the rest of it. Boy, I hope this isn't boring. But I'm going to keep going. I think I'm going to do 2 tapes because otherwise I'm just going to rush through it and you won't get my main point. What I'm trying to get across to you all is that narcissistic character disorder, the person when you're really throwing that word around, okay, and you're not using it as a slang word, like, oh, he's psychotic. Well, he's not really psychotic. He's just acting nutty. That's how narcissism seems to be used. But people are referring to like DSM-5 and stuff, like to justify calling someone narcissistic. But let me explain something to you, okay? This comes from the work basically of Alice Miller, by the way, if you want to check me out and see what I'm talking about. She's a Swiss psychoanalyst. And, first of all, she would say that narcissism starts at around 15 months of age due to an interaction between a mother and a child, okay? And she says it ends at about 3, this period that you have to make it through. But I would say it's more of a lifelong process that goes on. But anyway, what basically happens is that between a child and a mother who breeds a narcissistic child, okay, is that the child is only like loved or what we call cathexis, is invested in by the mother when the child behaves in a way that gratifies the mother. But if the mother is not gratified, then actually love is withdrawn. Okay, that's why you'll hear when people in the middle of treatment, they're really into it and they're really narcissistic. They'll say, like, I felt invisible a lot of times, or I feel invisible a lot of times, because their true self is never allowed to be positively acknowledged. It's always whatever expectation, whether it be a ballerina or whether it be a dope seller, it doesn't matter. Whatever the expectation is of the mother, that's when the mother invests love in the child, but does not show love or invest in the child in any way. When the child does something independent, but it isn't necessarily bad, it's just different than what the mother would think. Okay, as a result, over time, those kids end up feeling like they're real shit. Because the reason is because they're never respected for who they are as an individual. They only feel like they're respected when they're like what their mother would like them to be. Okay, that's a very lay. It's almost a lay example, but it's deep. Okay, but the person ends up feeling really bad about themselves. Okay, really bad. So how can you love yourself and feel really bad about yourself down deep? I mean, come on. There's a contradiction right there with the way the public uses the word narcissism, okay? And so what happens in the adult life of a narcissist internally, see, all you ever hear about is what happens externally. He did this, so he's a narcissist. He has orange hair, so he's a narcissist. He did that because he's a narcissist. No. You have to know what the internal experience of a person is to really understand what narcissism is to begin with, and then maybe you might empathize and be a little more careful before you start throwing the new N-word around. Okay? So what happens is this. Basically, the person feels like shit about themselves. And the way they go about trying to survive feeling like shit about themselves is they develop what's called grandiosity. Okay? And that's what most people think really narcissism is grandiosity. It's just a part of it. It's just trying to be the biggest in the world. Since you feel so shitty, you try to feel great. And the way you do that is by being grandiose, bigger than life, important to everybody. And you start to just compensate for that, okay? However, sometimes, and when you're grandiose, I want to mention two other things. Grandiosity, first of all, would be like self-infused love, okay? When you're grandiose, you're like trying to make yourself love yourself by being so great, okay? And then, basically, what happens, this is a very simple explanation, but life, the way it is, knocks the person's grandiosity upside the head because you can't be grandiose all the time. It's just an impossibility. You can't be everything to everybody all the time, or what you think you should be. So eventually their grandiosity gets punctured just by life, like a fight with their wife. All of a sudden the grandiosity gets punctured, but because the grandiosity protects this horrible feeling you have about yourself, what do you think happens? You get real depressed, even if it's for like 2 minutes. A terrible feeling comes over you, like you are nothing. See, here's an example. And then they get manipulative to try to get that person to respond the way they want them to, just like their mother did to them. Okay? So I just had a major technical difficulty, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen again, so I'm a little jarred. But being the carpe diem is the word of this show. Hope it's not the N-word. I'm going to just kind of keep on rolling and hope that I can do something. So I'm going to leave that little slip on there. Spontaneous. You see what happens. So anyway, as I was saying, I'm going to wrap this up really fast too, and I'm going to go into the rest next time. I'm sorry. Like I said, when life punctures the narcissist's sense of grandiosity, they get very depressed because they go back to feeling like they've always felt about themselves, which is like shit, okay? And that's what you call a narcissistic wound, okay? It's actually a wounding. I mean, an argument with your wife that doesn't turn out well could be this terrible wound to a narcissist, okay? But what happens is to bring themselves out of that terrible, wounded, meaningless, awful feeling that they're experiencing just because life hit them in a sensitive spot that was not bred, but, developed into them by the way they were parented and stuff. They want to get rid of that, that wounded feeling. So what's the best way to do it? Get mad. So what they do is they have what's called, they go through part of that sequence is what's called narcissistic rage, okay? And that's when they look really kind of crazy. But a lot of times that rage will get things under control for them because people get a little scared or weirded out or whatever. Someone's dependent on them and they don't, you know what I mean? So then all of a sudden the person kind of kowtows to that rage because it can be really, really enraging, furious, okay? And what happens is then, even the experience of the rage itself, let alone if it has any consequences of manipulating the person into doing what they want them to do in an argument, say, all of a sudden, guess what happens? Their grandiosity returns. And now they're bigger than life again. So a person who feels like shit can make themselves feel like, the happiest person in the world, or the greatest, not the happiest, can make them seem like the most important or greatest person in the world, and they feel like shit about themselves. And that's what I tell you. To end on a political note, I would say that, President Trump would be a very good example of that. So maybe people are assessing him right as narcissistic, I'm not sure. But anyway, I just wanted to point this out to you so that you could see internally what happens to these people. It's not just they're like shitty, nasty, self-centered people. There's a process that goes on that's extremely painful, and that's why they act so goofy. And I'm going to continue with a lot more of this. This is just to try to get you to see narcissistic people in a little bit different way, and not to so flippantly call people narcissistic because you're inferring that they're horribly suffering inside and have some terrible adaptive behaviors. I mean, you're making an assumption by using that word that's really pretty nasty, and you're making assumptions that are not there. It's just a pop word now. But it's a clinical word too, I mean, people say I had a heart attack. They, but well, never mind. I was going to say, the psychiatric or the medical word, it would be a myocardial infarction. Okay, we don't do that. They say heart attack, but I think when you're talking about someone's character, I think you got to be pretty careful about how what you call them. So this is not the end. I don't know what this is going to be. I don't know what happened. We'll see. But in the meantime, I got to chill out for a minute. So what I think I'm going to do is just play the end of my favorite song and hope this all turns out okay. So.